But we begin with President Obama's much anticipated and ultimately much delayed speech today on the attempted terrorist attack on Christmas Day. Mr. Obama was originally scheduled to speak today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Late this morning, that 1 p.m. start time was pushed back to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. At 3 p.m., when that rolled around, we were told instead to expect the speech an hour and a half later. And then at 4:34 p.m., finally, President Obama entered the White House State Dining Room to address the nation.
It appears that this incident was not the fault of a single individual or organization, but rather a systemic failure across organizations and agencies. I am less interested in passing out blame than I am in learning from and correcting these mistakes to make us safer. For ultimately, the buck stops with me. As president, I have a solemn responsibility to protect our nation and our people. And when the system fails, it is my responsibility.
Moments after the president was done speaking, his administration's official review of what went wrong was released. Now, much of what's in this report we've known for days. The information was available, we had it, but the analysis wasn't done, the dots weren't connected. It was a broad failure of the counterterrorism system, but the system itself is not fundamentally broken. What the review points to is a series of human errors. And while this detail is not included in the report specifically, NBC News has learned tonight of a startlingly small human error that allowed Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalib to board that U.S.-bound plane on Christmas Day. A senior State Department official is telling NBC News tonight that a simple, very simple misspelling of Abdul-Muttalib's name was the reason no one realized he had a visa to enter the United States, which should have sent alarm bells ringing. According to this official, one letter was dropped from Mr. Abdul-Muttalib's name when an employee cross-checked his name against a government database. Now, this happened back on November 20th. Had Mr. Abdul-Muttalib's name been entered correctly, officials apparently would have seen that he was classified as a possible terrorist, and then the fact that he also had a visa to enter the United States would have kicked him over into what they call a 3B classification. A 3B classification would have kept him from boarding the plane. One letter in his name. The fact that the failures in this case have been narrowed down to that level of detail gives you some idea of how intense these security reviews have been over the last few days. In his remarks today, President Obama also vowed to redouble U.S. efforts to defeat al-Qaeda.
Here at home, we will strengthen our defenses, but we will not succumb to a siege mentality that sacrifices the open society and liberties and values that we cherish as Americans. Because great and proud nations don't hunker down and hide behind walls of suspicion and mistrust. That is exactly what our adversaries want, and so long as I am president, we will never hand them that victory.
That is exactly what our adversaries want. And from what we know of our adversaries, that is what they want. But you want to know what else they want? They want us to, and I quote, bleed until bankruptcy. You might remember back in 2004, November 1st, 2004, Al Jazeera released the full transcript of a videotaped message from Osama bin Laden that they had played portions of a few days earlier. This tape now came out just before, immediately before, the 2004 elections in this country. This is the tape that John Kerry says may have cost him that presidential election. In that message from 2004, Osama bin Laden stated very clearly what al-Qaeda wanted to do. He said, quote, "We are continuing this policy in bleeding America to the point of bankruptcy. We, alongside the Mujahideen, bled Russia for 10 years until it went bankrupt and was forced to withdraw in defeat." Talking there, of course, about Afghanistan. Now, granted, this could be disinformation. This could be what Osama bin Laden wanted us to think his goal was. But this strategic message is, even with that caveat, worth considering. He continued, quote, "All that we have to do is send 2 Mujahideen to the furthest point east to raise a piece of cloth on which is written al-Qaeda in order to make generals race there, to cause America to suffer human, economic, and political losses without their achieving anything of note other than some benefits for their private corporations." Osama bin Laden in 2004 said his tactical goal was to distract the United States from pursuing our own interests and force us instead to spend ourselves into oblivion in a futile effort to try to stop anyone from using terrorist tactics against the U.S. And bin Laden said at the time that al-Qaeda were pretty delighted with the way that President Bush had chosen to fight them. Quote, "It's been easy for us to provoke and bait this administration. The darkness of black gold blurred Bush's vision and insight, so the Iraq war went ahead, the death toll rose, the American economy bled, and Bush became embroiled in the swamps of Iraq that threatened his future." And that's Osama bin Laden speaking in 2004. Part of asymmetric warfare, a small force taken on a large force, is that the small force always wants to force the big guy to fight on the little guy's terms. Forces large and small, of course, tend to win when they fight on their own terms. Even in sports, right? The University of Alabama would very much like to have the ball as much as possible in Heisman Trophy winner Mark Ingram's hands. Those would be the terms of the University of Alabama on the football field. Anybody playing them, say Texas, wants to fight on their own terms, which tonight at least include keeping Mark Ingram buried under a large pile of linemen at all times. President Obama clearly wants to fight this asymmetric war against al-Qaeda on American terms, not on al-Qaeda's terms. But when you listen to what their terms are, forcing American generals to race across the globe, bleeding America to the point of bankruptcy, distracting us from our own interests, and forcing us to address the provocation that they provide, are we still fighting on their terms, like we did in the Bush administration that so delighted them? Or are we fighting on our own terms now?
Our new approach in Afghanistan is likely to cost us roughly $30 billion for the military this year. Even before the Christmas attack, we increased investments in homeland security and aviation security. This includes an additional $1 billion in new systems and technologies that we need to protect our airports.
The President went on today to describe even further technological investments he wants the nation to look into making in terms of our transportation security. In 2004, Osama bin Laden was delighted with how the fight against America was going, how much military and economic pain America was willing to inflict upon ourselves in response to their relatively cheap provocations. 5.5 years later, is President Obama still following the al-Qaeda plan of how to deal with terrorism? Are we still fighting on their terms? Or is there a way to respond on our own terms in a way that's both effective and that prevents them from getting what they want? And if there is that way to fight them, have we started to find it?